In three, two, one. It is time once again to get solar powered. We welcome you back to the Solar Powered Podcast, where we celebrate the world changing magic of ordinary people telling extraordinary stories. My name is Ryan Hall. Thank you so much for joining us here today. And I think we've got an interesting conversation here today. I was just speaking with my guest before we started rolling this recording about just what it means to unscript your life. Because so many of us who are thought leaders, so many of us who are influential people in this world, we we feel like life has to go by a certain guidelines, has to go by certain steps. And we find that so often these big goals and big aspirations that we have don't line up like that. And I think we've got a great guest to talk about just what it means to unscript your life. His name is Hayden Henderson. Hayden Humphrey. I knew I was gonna miss that. But his name is Hayden Humphrey. He is a uplifter, he is a mindset coach, and we're gonna talk a little bit about what it means to unscript your life. And he joins us now. Hayden, thank you so much for joining us. And my apologies for missing your name.
It's all good. It's got a nice ring to it. I like that, Hayden Henderson. But
Absolutely.
no, it's great, Ryan. I appreciate you having me, and I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, Hayden Henderson coming live to your next coffee shop. You strap a guitar around your neck and start singing, start singing Joni Mitchell covers or whatever. Listen, man, tell us a little bit about your story. What's your story, man?
My story is one of breaking up with the script, I think, in many ways. I when I was younger, went to the good college and did well in college so that I could get a good job at an impressive company. And in 2016, found myself working in Chicago in tech sales for a name brand tech company, and ended up realizing through a series of events I missed my sales quota, how unhappy I was, and how much of my life, how much of my career to that point I really had spent trying to create a certain image, trying to look a certain way, trying to be as impressive as I possibly could. And really deriving so much of my sense of self-worth and so much of my sense of identity from the work that I was doing and what people thought of me. And so in the beginning of 2017, I decided I was going to leave. I left said full-time job and jumped into being self-employed, which is what I've been doing now for the last almost 7 years, 6.5 years, which is kind
Oh,
of
well, yeah,
crazy. And have gone through a number of different evolutions, have gone through a number of different iterations, but primarily I think the thread through all of it has been both deepening my own sense of self-awareness and my own sense of self-understanding, coming to know myself more deeply, and also starting to build a life that I feel like is a really true and authentic expression and reflection of who I am. And in that life, primarily what I'm doing is I'm supporting people in doing exactly that. I'm helping
right.
people in understanding from a mindset perspective, where and when they're caught in what I call scripts. These stories, either from parents or from families or from society, that lead us to believe there are certain things that we should be doing, that we must be doing, that we need to be doing, but might not actually be aligned for us, might not actually be the thing that we actually want to do. So my work with clients from a coaching perspective is supporting them in more deeply connecting to who are they authentically, and what do they actually want? And how do we start to take that thing, even if it's just the start of a thread, how do we take that thing that they want and support them in taking steps towards making it a reality? Oftentimes, this is career change. Sometimes this means reinventing or shifting the nature of their business, if they're a small business owner. But to me, that's the most enjoyable, the most exciting conversation that I could be in with somebody. So that's what I like to do.
I love it. I love it. And one of the, there's a lot to unpack from that, but I think the biggest thing that I wanted to touch on first is I think just the idea of going into going into your life, going into your education, going into your future with this idea that it has to look a certain way, that it has to look like, hey, I just went to the great college, I'm going to get the great tech sales job, or I'm going to go work on Wall Street or something and make a lot
Mm,
of money, have the
mm,
2.5 kids, all that
mm.
good stuff. And so I feel like so often we don't accommodate for, is this really who I am?
1,000%. I'd say the vast majority of the time we don't we don't accommodate or account for, like, is this who I actually am? And I think it's interesting because we live in a society, we live in a system that kind of values, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way, but values and uh, encourages conformity. And there's this conversation, there's this element of like fitting in and not sticking out and doing the smart thing, and being really focused on how you're looking, being really focused on what other people think of you. And I think in many ways that has led to a lot of really great things. I don't think that modern society is possible without the without the uh, placement of, without the existence of scripts. I think it's an inevitable thing, and actually a really helpful thing, I think, for us as a sort of global population evolutionarily. And it can also mean that on the individual level, we feel unfulfilled, we feel unseen, we feel stuck, we feel like we are not actively choosing and creating our own lives. And I have been fortunate enough, privileged enough to be in a space to enter into that conversation and to start to see the ways in which I can create something that feels more authentic and reflective of who I actually am. And just the level of fulfillment, the level of satisfaction, the level of joy, the level of peace of mind that I'm experiencing now as a result of that conversation, as a result of understanding who am I, what do I actually want, and being willing to make the decision in the face of what might feel like judgment, or what might feel like criticism, or what might feel like a loss of belonging. The willingness to make those decisions has led to what I feel is a much, I'm very happy. I am very happy with my life right now, and how it feels, and how I relate to myself, and how I relate to others. And so, for me, it just feels like it's very much a mission. It's very much a part of my mission, is I really just want to support other people in entering into the same conversation, because I genuinely believe that it is possible for everybody. I really genuinely believe that, no matter where you are, no matter who you are, no matter what has happened to you, you can start down this path of self-relationship. Because I really feel like that's ultimately what we're talking about, right? Is just a conversation around, how do you relate to yourself? How do you know yourself? How do you come to know yourself more deeply? And the opportunity to be able to support others and encourage others in doing that is like so fun.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. Like I find that I find that a lot of us in this coaching space, and just for the listeners' information, we both graduated from the same coach training program, granted different campuses, so to speak, but it's
Mm-hmm.
still the same curriculum, a lot of the same, a lot of the same community. But I find that a lot of us in this community, a lot of us who went through the same program,
Mm-hmm.
we have a moment where we realize that just our life isn't working the way that we thought it was supposed to work. Our life isn't doesn't feel like you're almost, I can tell you've got a good answer to this question just by that
Oh.
grin on your face.
Mm.
But we that there's a moment when we just realize this ain't working anymore. It's like a mad as hell and I'm not going to take this anymore moment.
Mm.
What was that moment for you?
That's a great question. You know, uh, I think I've had multiple. I genuinely feel like I've had multiple, and I really feel like, it's interesting. I was just having a conversation with my sister actually the other week, because we have a lot of these same kinds of conversations, and we were talking about how we sort of came to this place. And for her, it was this very sort of sudden, like, wake up, see it in full view kind of thing. And I feel like for me, it's been this very sort of gradual unfolding with these maybe more sort of memorable spikes of, oh, wow, okay, this isn't working. I need to be doing something else. So like a few highlights are like, one, for example, when I was in college, I went to a business school, and I, at the time, really thought that success was working at a name brand, super impressive company in an impressive city. So I had an internship with Ernst and Young. It's like a Big Four, enormous company, professional services firm
Sure.
in New York. And I remember one of the last weeks of my internship, we were sitting and we were doing an audit interview with a client, and it was like me and like a staff and then like a manager on the project. And we finish up the interview, and the guy that we're interviewing across the table is like, listen, I don't want to be rude, but I don't know how you guys do this. Like, this is really boring. And the two people that I'm sitting with are like laughing politely. But as soon as he said it, I in my head was like, this is really boring. Like, why am I doing this? Why have I put myself in this situation? And it just sort of like opened this, different perspective of like, oh, what am I doing? And why am I working on this? And at the time, I had thought that's what I was going to do. I was like, if I get an offer, like, I'm going to accept this and this is what I'm going to be doing. But that conversation was like, I don't think I want to be doing that. So I started to question, and I recognized, like, I think I want to work in at a startup. That sounds really exciting. And ended up getting a startup job out of college. And another moment for me was, like I said, missing my sales quota, and really had this sort of coming into myself realization where I was like, why am I deriving so much of my sense of self-worth and identity from this work, and recognizing or seeing an opportunity to relate to myself differently. I think the moment that I'll share that's been most recent is I burned out really hard at the end of probably like middle of 2021 is when it started. And I started to really realize it in the fall and winter of 2021. And then, moving into the spring of 2022, I knew I had to do something different. I was like, something has to change. I'm so tired. And I feel like I'm just barely surviving. I'm just scraping by, constantly scraping by. And so I decided to move back to Columbus, where I'm from originally. And really, like, without knowing it, or sort of with knowing it, but maybe it was a little bit more of sort of like an unconscious decision, deciding to like really just give myself as much time and space as I needed and just letting myself do whatever felt comfortable, and really not forcing myself to do anything. And in doing that, in like recovering from that burnout and finding this sense of peace and stability and self-love, self-compassion that I think I'd been looking for a really long time through all the other things that I had been doing, really finding that. And now being in this conversation around, how do I build my life from here with these at the center? Like, these are my new priorities. These are my new values based on what I now know to be true about myself. And so, yeah, so I don't think it wasn't any one, like,
Right.
kind of thing, but it's just been this sort of like series of events where I was trying so hard at one particular strategy, and then it ended up not working out or blowing up, or whatever ended up happening. But I think the thing that I want to say, and part of the reason I was laughing when you were asking this question is, I think that for other folks too, there is this conversation around how do you interpret these events? And do you use those kinds of events as a wake-up call, or do you use them as further evidence for why things won't work, and like why you're not worthy of it, and why it's not going to work for you, and that sort of thing. And so I think that's an important element of it, is like, how are you relating to interpreting the events in your life? Are you using them as opportunities to learn things about yourself and to question what you believe to be true? Because ultimately, at each of those inflection points, I then had to make a decision of like, do I double down on the strategy that I was using to this point, or do I let go of that strategy in service of something new without knowing necessarily what the new thing was? But without doing that, without allowing for, that potentially brand new mindset or that brand new perspective, I might have just continued to do the thing that I was doing previously.
Yeah, no, that's a very powerful, just an incredibly powerful statement. Just really thinking of that, I feel like so many of us have like similar moments where it's not like it's not like the ultimate aha moment where there's an angel choir and game show bells. It's not that obvious. But if it doesn't get you to start questioning just why am I doing this? What is this good for? Why do I keep wanting to go down this road when I know it's not going to get me to where I want to go, but the road may be comfortable. The road may be safe, but I know that it's not going to get me to where I want it to where I want to go.
Totally.
If it doesn't lead you to start having those questions and having that conversation with yourself, what good is this whole conversation,
Totally. Yeah, it is interesting because it's this sort of this like intrinsic or like internal versus external motivation. And I think sometimes I think what can happen is like people can get stuck in that, like, one being the worst, most uncomfortable ever, and 10 being the most excited about what you're doing. People get stuck in that like 5 to 6 4, 5, 6 kind of range where it's really comfortable and like not, there's everything's good, everything's okay. There's not anything that's like overtly wrong. Everything's going fine, that sort of thing. And so there's not really necessarily like a prompting or an impetus to really fundamentally assess and question and analyze why you're doing the things that you're doing and how things are going. So I think in many ways, like that's the gift of the bottom. That's the gift of those burnout, breakdown moments, is like it really it's incredibly uncomfortable, but it allows for a really deep level of introspection and a really sort of critical assessment of the most basic structures of your life, the most basic stories, fundamental stories that you have about yourself and about the world, for you to question them. And that to me is the most important thing, because here's the thing too, questioning, I love this idea of like questioning your own beliefs and questioning your own thinking, because the worst case scenario in doing that is that you come to the same conclusion. Right. You come to the same conclusion. And I actually would argue that there's maybe no downside to questioning, because it's only upside. Either you reinforce the belief that you currently have, which is great. You develop a deeper level of conviction and trust in yourself and in life, or you come to a different realization. You come to a different awareness. You come to a different thought. And you're then able to replace it or create something that feels like it's more in alignment with who you actually are and who you naturally are. And to me, that's so much of this game, right? So much of this unscripting game is like becoming aware of the instructions that you've been sort of conditioned into, and the beliefs and the thoughts and the stories and the expectations and the preconceived notions that have been given to you by your family and by society, becoming aware of what those are, and then deciding, what of this do I want to keep? What of this do I like? And what of this do I want to replace? What of this do I want to tweak or alter based on who I know myself to be and based on what feels best to me? So it's a gift, I think, to question. And the cool part is you don't have to wait for a breakdown or like a bottom to do it.
Right.
You can actively be in the conversation all the time. And I feel really grateful that, I think I've developed a habit of doing that. I'm constantly in my life thinking about, what is this telling me? What is this telling me about myself? If I feel a level of discomfort, or if I get triggered, if I have a reaction to something, I work through it, and then I go, oh, interesting. What's here for me? Cool. How cool. It's like another piece of myself that I get to like understand and integrate. So that over time, I'm spending less of my life just in this sort of reactionary state, reactionary pattern, and I'm more consciously responding to and choosing into, every moment.
I love it. Asking those questions, asking those difficult questions of yourself, sometimes it's, sometimes like one of my favorite books is Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins.
Mm.
And Goggins had his accountability mirror.
Mm.
And granted, he's a lot more in your face about it, but
Yeah.
he had his accountability mirror where he would take post-it notes and face that every day as he was trying to lose the weight to go into Navy SEAL training and all that good stuff.
Mm.
But one thing I never noticed from that I never noticed from that, and it kind of came up for me as you were sharing that, is questioning those beliefs, questioning those those core stories about yourself, but
Mm.
not making yourself wrong for having them. Because that, and admittedly, this may be a little bit of my stuff coming into play here, but if you're questioning yourself and you're making yourself wrong for having these beliefs and having these, life lessons that you've been
Mm.
taking for all these years,
Mm.
you're never going to get out of first gear.
It's it's the paradox. It is a paradox. It like it like doesn't make logical, rational sense in a way, to have both of these things be true at the same time. To like have these
Right.
stories that don't serve you and to benefit from actively working to change them, and at the same time to hold none of it as wrong, to hold it all as perfect. It really just makes me think about this idea of being unconditionally loving towards others, unconditionally loving towards self. And that's the part that I love about the word unconditional. It's without condition, literally without condition, under no circumstances, not being loving or unkind towards self. And I think, the interesting part about it, this is really what I've come to recognize, is like, I think I spent a long time trying to fix myself. I saw a lot of what I was doing, the patterns that I had, and the ways that I was showing up as wrong, because there was an element of me that didn't like the way that I was. So I wanted to change it. So I can give credit to that part of myself for prompting a change and prompting me to seek out this conversation and to start this journey. And I also recognize there was a lot of sort of self-criticism and self-judgment and self-hatred in that, because there was this element of like, I'm not okay as I am. It's not okay to be this way. I should be different. I need to be different. And this sort of what felt like this weird urgency, this like relentless urgency to fix it, to fix myself, to get to a place where I was enough and I felt like I'd done enough and I'd accomplished enough, and whatever. And what's been so awesome about that burnout that I mentioned, sort of like hitting that bottom, was it really had me understand this strategy is not sustainable. I can't keep doing this. I cannot keep living this way because it is exhausting. I'm exhausted. I'm constantly fearful. I'm constantly panicked. I'm constantly anxious. So what if I just let go entirely? What if I just let go of the need or the compulsion to fix myself or to have things look or seem or feel a certain way? And what if I just tried that? What if I just try it for a period of time and just see what happens? And, like I was saying earlier, it's like the level of peace and relief that comes from being more unconditionally loving towards self is incredible. And I see so clearly now how, that's been so much of my drive, so much of what I've wanted, so much of what I've been seeking, maybe not intellectually, but from a heart perspective, just being okay with myself. But you do, I think, have to come to that place where you are able to live in the paradox of it and to see the thing that you want to change, but also love it, be able to integrate it, into yourself.
Completely. Oddly enough, as you were sharing that, what came to me is the idea of just an expert musician, like a jazz pianist, right? So you brought up this concept several times during this conversation, the idea of trusting yourself, trusting the people in your life that you're on the right path. When you're, when you're when you're playing jazz music, you have that basic structure of, you know, what key you're in, what changes are in, who's going to take what solo, but you really never know where that solo is going to go. You really never know where that song is going to go, but you have to trust the other people up on the stage with you. You have to trust that they are listening to you when they're absorbed, kind of listening to where you're going. So I guess my point in saying this is that none of us get there alone. None of us get there by ourselves. There's always a community. There's always a team behind you to help you unscript your life, so to speak.
1,000%. It's such a beautiful analogy. It's such a beautiful image. I appreciate you sharing that. And I think you're 100% right. It's like this understanding the basic rules and understanding that there are certain elements that will present themselves, make themselves clear, be addressed in the moment. And I continue to find ways in which I have developed this strategy, this orientation to life that's very much about control and very much about knowing exactly how things are going to go and trying to control and manipulate and plan and have all the things in the right place so as to try and create a certain result. But what's interesting is I just find myself 9 times out of 10, it never goes that way. I'm constantly anxious and panicked because I'm fearful about ultimately, right? I'm fearful about not getting what I want. That's why I feel this desire to control or manipulate. And it's lonely. It's also lonely. So I love what you said around community. And like the thing that came up for me as you were talking was, also just the recognition that you have a relationship with life. You have a relationship with life, like your life and what you're doing and the results that are making their way into your life. Like it's a co-created experience. It's a co-creative process. And like, there are only so many things that you can do. And then there are things that are totally out of your control that you don't have any control over. And like literally at one point I sat down and I mapped out, okay, based on what I want, what are the things that are actually under my control and what are the things that I don't have any control over? And it's like, I have to keep that top of mind for myself as I'm moving through life. And I think that, similar to how when you start to learn a new skill over time, it becomes more unconscious and you don't have to think about it as much. It just becomes, it's like a process of developing towards mastery, having mastery over something. Starting to, I feel, create that same experience for myself around how I create results, how I get the things that I want in my life, how I create the experiences that I want in my life. Starting to understand like where are the places that I get to and that I like to and that I want to exert influence, and then what are the places where I can let go and trust and just know it's being taken care of. I actually don't need to know X, Y, and Z and the plan of how it's going to come into existence, because I know that it will. And it's interesting because I think that we live in a society. I think we live in a culture that's very sort of like mapped out, planned out, strategic, very detailed sort of like effort, have a plan and then go put the plan into action, and et cetera, et cetera. Valuable. Absolutely. There's elements of that that are really valuable. Some people align with that more than others. But I think that, for a large portion of the population, that isn't necessarily the answer. So it's this other conversation around how do you utilize the elements from that strategy that feel good, but then also make space for doing things differently.
Completely. I love the analogy of almost like like a cake recipe, for example. You know, most of these recipes, except if you're the except if you had a Southern grandmother, like I had two of them, most of these recipes are going to be written down. You use X amount of this, X amount of Y, that kind of thing. But as you're making it, perhaps you want to experiment with, okay, maybe I should try brown sugar instead of white sugar. Or, maybe I could try, I don't know, coconut milk instead of, dairy milk. And you determine that, okay, that didn't work. Let me try this. Let me stick to the script. And there's, like you said, there's so much of life, so much of, so much of society. We need things kind of laid out for us in that recipe, but life doesn't work like that. At least in my experience, life just does not work like that, because
Yeah.
my way of living is not going to be your way of living, or any of our viewers, or any of our listeners.
So that then becomes the exact conversation, right? How do you determine your way of living?
Yeah.
What does that look like? And for me, that's the most exciting conversation we could be in. That's the most exciting conversation I can be in with somebody, because to me, it's this like, if we talk about life, the point of life is to enjoy your life. That's the point. It's to enjoy it. And I think that when you do that right, when you're doing it consciously, the results that you want, the impact that you want, the wealth that you want, the community that you want, the resources that you want will make their way to you naturally. They'll make their way to you naturally and effortlessly. It won't have to be this struggle. It won't feel like this chore. We just get so focused on the results. We get so focused on the material. We get so focused on the, impression and the status or the recognition from others. And we think, oh, well, once I have that, then I'll feel the way that I want. Then my life will feel the way that I want. Then I'll feel the way that I want about myself, and, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think becomes this conversation of like, how do you get both? How do you get both? How do you not sacrifice the enjoyment of your everyday life in service of results that you may or may not ultimately care about once you achieve those things? And how do you get the results that you really care about? And like, it requires a very different kind of conversation. It requires a very sort of ambiguous, nebulous, sometimes messy, sometimes chaotic, not necessarily with form, a little bit formless kind of conversation.
Right.
So, it's interesting to me, and I absolutely understand why a lot of people don't participate in those kinds of conversations. and, these kinds of conversations, and even why sometimes, not that we're venturing into like a spiritual realm or religious realm or anything like that, but why some people consider that woo woo. Because of how we're taught to relate to ourselves and because of how we're taught to navigate life. But I think so much of finding your unique way of living is being in the question and being willing to experiment. Ultimately, that's really what it is. It's like, I love that, I love that analogy of like, yeah, you try this. How did it feel? Did it work? Did it produce the results that you wanted it to? And if not, cool. Then like, you just try something else. So part of it too, this is the other thing that's coming up for me as you were talking, was like, part of this too, I think, is being really cognizant about the relationship that you have with yourself, and really being in this question around how can you expand, amplify the amount of grace and compassion that you have for yourself, because you creating your life the way that you want to, creating an experience that feels incredibly exciting and satisfying and unique and authentic to you, is going to require failure. It's going to require a lot of failure. It's going to require a lot of mistakes. It's going to require a lot of like stepping in it. It's going to require a lot of discomfort. And like, if you're unwilling to change the nature of the relationship that you have with yourself, it's going to be a chore. It's just going to be suffering all the way up and all the way down, because anytime then that something doesn't go the way that you thought that it should or that it would, you make it mean something about you. You beat yourself up, versus looking at all of this. It's just a grand experiment. It's literally all of it's a grand experiment, and an opportunity to learn more about yourself, to come to this place where you see and know, this is how I uniquely create my own life. But it's just takes time and experimentation to get there.
Takes time, it takes experimentation, and like you said, it takes a lot of failure. It takes a lot of failure. Getting back to my analogy about the jazz musician, that same piano player might go off the stage and he might be beating himself up because something that he may have tried on the stage just didn't work, but he still got a standing ovation from it.
1000%.
Because do you really like, do most people really know the failure? Can most people really see it? I mean, if you're gonna, if you're a baseball player, you're swinging at a, third strike in the dirt. Yeah, that's a failure that is gonna be witnessed by 30,000 people in the stands and million people on TV. But those are obvious. A lot of this stuff, getting back to your word, a lot of this stuff is ambiguous. Is it really, is it really a failure to one person, or is it a failure to another person, or is it just like a straight out, I screwed up,
Totally. It's, I think, the sort of like the gift and the curse of being a high achiever, or being somebody who is intrinsically motivated and who holds themselves to a high standard, is like, it means that you create greater results. You go faster, you go further, you improve in a way that is more diligent. You're more diligent about your own optimization and your own improvement. And it can also come with a greater degree of scrutiny, self-scrutiny, and a greater degree of self-criticism, and a greater degree of self-judgment. And so it is interesting. It does become this conversation around like, when does it stop being helpful and supportive? If we're talking about this conversation around creation and mastery of a process, or developing a particular skill. And I think I'm coming to recognize over time that I more appreciate skill that's developed through positive encouragement and discipline, but loving discipline, versus self-criticism, self-judgment, self-flagellation, beating of self, ultimately rooted in this not enough kind of story.
Been truly a fascinating conversation, and I could certainly go on about just geeking out about leadership and changing our stories. I could go about this for hours, but I did want to ask you one more question before we wrap up. What kind of people do you find that tend to be attracted to you to want to want to say, "Hey, Hayden, help me unscript my life"?
Mm. Well, I think, it's a couple different kinds of people. I think often, I think one is folks who resonate with what I'm sharing. I think that, it's funny. We had this conversation earlier. I think last week you and I were talking about this exact thing. And, I've really come to recognize the way that I feel like I'm showing up now is I feel very present and I feel very, like I'm really speaking from my own heart. And I'm really speaking from a place of like, I really genuinely, this is how I talk to my clients. This is
Sure.
exactly how I talk to my clients. So if it resonates with you, if what I'm sharing resonates with you, if there's a sense of resonance, if there's a sense of feeling seen, feeling inspired, feeling encouraged, feeling uplifted, those are the folks that I really enjoy working with. And, from a more sort of like contextual or circumstantial perspective, it's often people who feel stuck, who feel unfulfilled, who feel like they have been trying and trying and trying and trying and trying, running on this treadmill and they're exhausted, but they don't seem to be making any progress, or like things don't really seem to be changing. Often folks who find themselves in like a corporate role, for example, or even like small business owners who feel like they've burned out after attempting to build in a particular way, and they're looking to do it different. For me, so much of the work that I do with people is around self-discovery and is around really more deeply understanding what your internal narratives are, and um, developing, recognizing, allowing for your own self-efficacy, your own agency to come forward. And so the people that I really love working with are people who really want to do this work, people who are really interested in learning about themselves, going deep in learning about themselves, going deep in understanding who they are, why they're here, and how to create an experience, how to create a life that is a 10 out of 10. Yeah, right. Because
Right.
we're only
Yep.
here one time. We're literally like, we have this one opportunity to be here. And like, I feel so motivated and inspired to really look at like, how do I live this in the best possible way? And like, I love working with people who feel that same way.
I love it. I love it. It. I forget who said it, but do you really want to be living the same life, the same year over and over and over again for the next 75, 80 years? Or do you want a life that just lights you up and
Mm,
you're not sitting in the nursing home somewhere on a rocking chair wondering about what if?
absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely agreed.
Yeah. Just one more note. I talk all the time about how people's stories can change the world, about how people's stories can really shape their, their entire world. And I think this conversation is just really a beautiful example of just how a simple story about wanting to change the way that you see life can
Mhm.
really affect so many people. So thank you so much
Mhm.
thank you so much for swimming in the story with me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the space. Thanks so much for the questions and the energy and the really awesome analogies and metaphors. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Pleasure's mine, Hayden. How can people find you online, my brother?
Super active on LinkedIn. You can find me there under Hayden Humphrey, or my website, haydenhumphrey.com.
Beautiful. And I'll include links in the description of this here podcast. So
Awesome.
Hayden, thank you so much for joining us here today. And thank you for tuning into the Solar Powered Podcast, the presentation of Royal Hearts Media. For more information about Royal Hearts Media, reach out and join us on our website at royalheartsmedia.com. Follow me on the social media machine at Ryan Hall Writes on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, or shoot me a good old fashioned email at royalheartscoaching@gmail.com. Until we meet again, this is Ryan Hall saying thanks for listening. So long for now, and go get solar power.